My beloved child, pause here for a moment, because what you are about to hear was meant to find you at a very particular point in your journey. Do not hurry past this. Do not treat this as another message appearing among thousands of voices competing for your attention. Something has shifted in the hidden emotional world surrounding your connection, and the shift did not begin with a dramatic event, a sudden meeting, or a perfectly planned confession. It began with words. A few words spoken by someone whose heart has been carrying more than they have ever admitted. Your soulmate has just said something they can never take back, and even they do not yet understand how deeply those words may change everything between you. Stay with this until the end, because the sentence itself is only the beginning. What happened immediately after it was spoken reveals far more than the words alone. There are moments when a person speaks from habit, moments when they speak from fear, and moments when something buried so deeply inside them suddenly rises before their careful mind has time to stop it. This was one of those moments. Your soulmate had been trying to remain composed. They had been trying to convince themselves that what they felt for you could still be managed, organized, delayed, perhaps even ignored. They had rehearsed explanations inside their mind. They had told themselves that time would make everything simpler. They had imagined that if they stayed quiet long enough, the intensity would settle. But something happened. A conversation moved in a direction they did not expect, your name entered the room in a way they were not prepared for, and suddenly the walls they had built around their heart became too weak to hold back what was true. Do not skip what comes next, because there is a detail here that changes the meaning of everything. They were not alone when they said it. Someone else heard them. Someone whose opinion carries weight in their life. Someone who had suspected for a long time that your soulmate was hiding something about you. The conversation may have started casually, perhaps with a question, perhaps with a teasing remark, perhaps with someone noticing the way your soulmate becomes quieter whenever your name is mentioned. But then the atmosphere changed. The person sitting near them asked something more direct. They asked why your soulmate could speak about almost anyone without hesitation, yet when it came to you, their entire energy seemed to shift. At first, your soulmate avoided the question. They smiled in that uncomfortable way people smile when they are trying to turn something serious into something harmless. They looked away. They changed the subject. They gave an answer that sounded believable on the surface but felt empty underneath. Yet the person across from them did not let the moment disappear. They asked again, more gently this time, and something inside your soulmate broke open. Not in a frightening way, not through anger, but through exhaustion. The exhaustion of pretending that you are ordinary to them when you have never felt ordinary. The exhaustion of acting unaffected when memories of you have followed them into quiet rooms, late nights, ordinary mornings, and moments when they least expected to think about you. And then they said it. The room became still. Your soulmate immediately realized what had left their mouth, but it was too late to call the words back. The person listening did not laugh. They did not interrupt. They simply looked at your soulmate differently, because the sentence was not something casual. It was not, "I miss them." It was not, "I still think about them sometimes." Those would have been easier admissions. What your soulmate said carried a permanence that frightened even them. The truth they had been hiding was suddenly standing outside of them, no longer protected by silence. And once truth leaves the heart and becomes sound, the person who spoke it must decide whether to deny it or finally become brave enough to live according to it. Stay until the end, because the exact emotional meaning of what they said is going to become clearer, but first you need to understand why it took so long to surface. Your soulmate has not been struggling because they feel nothing. Their struggle has been complicated precisely because they feel too much. There is a difference. A person who feels nothing rarely needs endless internal arguments. They do not repeatedly revisit old conversations. They do not wonder what they should have said differently. They do not imagine alternate versions of the future. They do not hear your name and suddenly feel the need to control their expression. Indifference is quiet. What has been happening inside your soulmate has been anything but quiet. There were times when they came close to telling you something important and then pulled away. You may have sensed those moments without fully understanding them. A message that seemed like it was leading somewhere deeper suddenly became short. A conversation that felt unusually honest was followed by distance. A moment of warmth was followed by silence. This inconsistency may have made you wonder whether you had imagined the connection altogether. But there was another explanation beneath the surface. Every time your soulmate allowed themselves to move emotionally closer to you, they became aware of how much power the connection already had over them. And instead of following that truth, they sometimes retreated from it. Heaven does not need you to chase confusion, my child. Remember that. The purpose of this message is not to tell you to abandon your peace and run after someone who has not yet shown you consistency. Your heart deserves clarity in actions, not only imagined intentions. But within this fictional story, something important is happening now because the person who kept running from honesty has finally heard themselves speak the truth aloud. That matters, because a private feeling can be hidden indefinitely. A spoken truth creates consequences. After your soulmate said those words, there was a long pause. The other person asked, "Do you realize what you just said?" Your soulmate tried to answer quickly, but no answer came. Their first instinct was to soften it, to make it sound smaller than it was. They almost said they did not mean it that way. They almost laughed. They almost changed the subject again. But something stopped them. Perhaps they were tired of lying to themselves. Perhaps hearing their own voice say it made denial suddenly feel impossible. And instead of taking the sentence back, they remained quiet. That silence was an answer. The person listening leaned closer and asked another question. This question was different. It was not about whether your soulmate cared for you. That had already become obvious. The new question was much more dangerous to their defenses. Then what are you going to do about it? Those words followed your soulmate long after the conversation ended. Because feeling something is one thing. Choosing what to do with that feeling is another. This is where the story begins to turn. For a long time, your soulmate may have believed they could remain somewhere between longing and action, between memory and decision. They could think about you without approaching you. They could care without admitting how deeply. They could imagine a future while postponing every step that might make that future real. But the sentence they spoke destroyed that comfortable middle ground. Suddenly someone else knew. Suddenly your soulmate heard themselves confess something that could no longer be dismissed as temporary emotion. And what they said was this: I can imagine my life changing in 100 different ways, but I cannot imagine never knowing what could have happened with them. Let those words settle. Not because they are a promise. Not because they automatically guarantee a reunion, relationship, or perfect ending. But because they reveal the place you occupy inside this fictional emotional world. Your soulmate did not simply confess affection. They confessed unfinished possibility. They admitted that the unanswered question of you has become too significant to ignore. The person who heard them understood instantly. They said, then maybe you are not afraid of losing them. Maybe you are afraid that if you truly choose them, you will have to become the person you keep saying you want to become. That sentence hit your soulmate even harder. Because there is something they have rarely admitted: you do not only awaken love inside them. You awaken self-awareness. Around you, they become conscious of the places where they have been hiding, delaying, avoiding, and settling. You somehow remind them of a version of themselves that is more courageous, more honest, more emotionally present. And that can be beautiful, but it can also feel overwhelming to someone who has spent a long time surviving through emotional distance. Do not move away yet. Something huge is waiting inside the next part of this revelation, because after that conversation your soulmate did something they had not planned to do. They went somewhere alone. They needed distance from other voices. They needed to hear what remained when no one was questioning them. And in that private space, the words returned. I cannot imagine never knowing what could have happened with them. Again. And again. And again. But each repetition began to change. At first, the sentence sounded like regret. Then it sounded like fear. Then it sounded like a decision forming. Your soulmate began remembering moments with you they had deliberately pushed aside. Not only dramatic memories, but small ones. The expression on your face when you were trying not to reveal that something mattered. A conversation that ended too soon. Something kind you said without realizing they would remember it much later. The way your presence made ordinary moments feel unusually vivid. They remembered times when you may have needed reassurance and they remained silent. They remembered moments when they almost reached out. They remembered how many excuses they had created because admitting the simple truth felt more frightening than complicated explanations, and then another realization arrived. They understood that the thing they could never take back was larger than the sentence itself. By speaking about you honestly in front of another person, they crossed an invisible line. They became responsible for what they now knew about themselves. Before that moment, they could claim uncertainty. Now they could not. Before that moment, they could say the connection was probably only nostalgia. Now they knew that explanation was incomplete. Before that moment, they could tell themselves they would eventually forget. But what they said proved they were not trying to forget you. They were trying to avoid discovering whether the connection still had a future. This difference changes everything. My child, sometimes the heart does not reveal itself through certainty. Sometimes it reveals itself through the one question a person cannot stop carrying. Your soulmate's question has become impossible to silence. What if I lose something real simply because I was too afraid to discover what it could become? And then something unexpected happened. They picked up their phone. Yes, this is where the tension deepens. They opened something connected to you. Perhaps an old conversation. Perhaps your profile. Perhaps a photograph, a message, or some reminder they had told themselves they no longer revisited. Their thumb hovered. Their mind began creating all the familiar reasons not to do anything. What if too much time had passed? What if you had changed? What if you no longer cared? What if opening the door created questions they were not ready to answer? But beneath all those fears was one question that felt louder than the rest. What if they still feel it too? They began typing. Then they stopped. They erased it. They typed again. This time the words were more honest. They erased those too. Not because they did not want to speak, but because the message they wanted to send was no longer something casual. They realized they did not want to return to you with half-truths. They did not want another vague conversation that left both of you more confused. Something about the confession they had made earlier had changed the standard. Once they had spoken honestly to someone else, sending you a meaningless message suddenly felt cowardly. So they put the phone down. And for a moment, it seemed as though nothing would happen. But do not skip now, because this is the part no one in that earlier conversation knew was coming. Your soulmate received a message. Not from you. From the same person who had heard the confession. The message contained only a few words: do not make them pay for a fear they did not create. Your soulmate stared at that sentence for a long time. Something inside them tightened, because they knew immediately what it meant. Their hesitation with you was never entirely about you. Some of it began long before you entered their life. Old disappointments. Old patterns. Moments when vulnerability had not been handled gently. Experiences that taught them to stay protected. They had carried those lessons forward without realizing how heavily they were influencing the connection between you. And suddenly they saw something they had not wanted to see. There were times when you may have been responding to wounds you did not cause. You may have been standing before walls that were built because of someone else. Your soulmate had occasionally interpreted closeness as danger, not because you were dangerous, but because closeness itself had become unfamiliar. And perhaps without intending to, they made you question your own value when the real conflict was happening inside them. This realization did not make them feel comfortable. It made them emotional. Not because heaven was punishing them. Not because they were meant to drown in regret. But because growth sometimes begins when a person finally sees the impact of the defenses they once believed were protecting them. They whispered something quietly then. Something no one else heard. I should have been braver with them. And that may be the sentence that changes the next chapter. Because regret can do two things. It can become another room where someone hides, or it can become the doorway through which they finally move. Your soulmate stood at that doorway. They began thinking not only about what they wanted from you, but about what they would need to bring to you if they returned. Honesty. Consistency. Accountability. Patience. The willingness to listen without turning every difficult conversation into distance. The ability to speak before silence creates stories neither of you intended. And for perhaps the first time, they understood that wanting you was not enough. They would have to be ready to meet you honestly. Stay with this message, because something extraordinary is still beneath the surface. Your soulmate's confession was not the only thing revealed in that room. After they left, the person who heard everything had a conversation of their own. Someone else asked what had happened. And while they did not repeat every detail, they said something that would eventually make its way back to your soulmate in a completely unexpected form. They said, "I have never seen them speak about anyone that way." Those words began moving quietly through a small circle of people who care about your soulmate. Not as gossip. Not as entertainment. But as confirmation of something several people had already noticed. Your soulmate had changed whenever you were mentioned. One person remembered how they defended you during a conversation months earlier when you were not there. Another remembered how they suddenly became distant whenever someone suggested they should simply move on. Someone else remembered a strange moment when your soulmate was laughing with everyone, then became silent after hearing something that reminded them of you. Individual moments that once appeared meaningless were beginning to form a pattern. Your soulmate did not know this yet. They believed their feelings had remained invisible. They were wrong. And that is where another layer opens. Sometimes the person hiding their love is the last person to realize how visible that love has become. Others had noticed the pauses, the defensiveness, the softness. The way your soulmate could remember strangely specific details about you while pretending not to care. The way conversations about future relationships always seemed to become complicated when someone asked what they actually wanted. The signs were there. But the confession gave those signs a name. Later, your soulmate returned to the same place where the conversation had happened. The room was quieter now. The person who heard them earlier looked at them and asked one final question. Would you still say it if they were standing here? Your soulmate froze. Because that was different. It was easy to confess to someone who was not you. But saying it to you would mean risking an answer. They would no longer be able to control the outcome. They imagined you standing across from them. For a moment, all the complicated explanations disappeared. They imagined looking into your eyes and trying to say what had taken them so long to understand. And something unexpected happened. They smiled. Not because they were certain you would choose them. Not because they imagined everything becoming perfect. They smiled because for the first time, honesty felt less frightening than another year of wondering. They answered quietly, yes. The person across from them asked, "You would really tell them?" Your soulmate paused. Then they said, "I think I have to." Those words changed the energy of the room. Because, "I want to," can remain a fantasy. "I have to" sounds like someone who has realized silence now carries a greater cost than vulnerability. But there is still something your soulmate has not said. Something even deeper than their first confession. And this is where heaven asks you not to rush ahead emotionally. Do not build your entire future around imagined words. Do not abandon your standards because someone may care deeply. A meaningful connection should not require you to shrink, chase, or endlessly interpret silence. You are allowed to desire both love and clarity. You are allowed to receive tenderness without sacrificing self-respect. Whatever unfolds, let your peace remain your foundation. Because the next revelation is not about whether your soulmate loves you enough. It is about what they finally understood they might have misunderstood about you. For months, perhaps longer, your soulmate believed one particular story about your silence, your distance, or the way you responded to them. They believed you had emotionally moved on faster than you actually did. They interpreted one moment as rejection. They took one absence, one delayed response, one boundary, or one change in your behavior and created an entire conclusion around it. They thought you were finished. That assumption became one of the reasons they remained quiet. But during the conversation, the person sitting with them challenged that story. They asked, did they actually tell you that, or did you decide it for them? Your soulmate had no answer. Because you never said the words they had been living as though you said. They had mistaken uncertainty for certainty. They had built distance around an assumption. And suddenly they wondered how much time had passed because both of you might have been waiting for clarity from the other. That thought shook them. They picked up their phone again. This time there was no typing. Instead, they searched for something old. A message from you. One they had read many times before but had never fully understood. They found it. They read it slowly. And a sentence inside that old message suddenly looked completely different. The words had always been there, but your soulmate had interpreted them through fear. Now, after everything they had confessed, the same sentence sounded less like goodbye and more like an invitation they had been too afraid to recognize. Their breathing changed. They read it again. And then again. The person near them noticed their expression and asked, "What is it?" Your soulmate did not answer immediately. They were staring at your words. Then they whispered, "I think I got this wrong." That realization opened another door. Because if they had misunderstood your message, then perhaps the story they had been telling themselves about the two of you was incomplete. Perhaps the connection did not disappear. Perhaps it became buried beneath assumptions neither of you knew how to challenge. Your soulmate scrolled farther into the old conversation. And there, several messages earlier, they found something else. Something you had said casually. Something they had forgotten. A simple sentence revealing that you were not asking them to be perfect. You were asking them to be honest. They stared at it. Honest. That word again. The same thing life had been demanding from them all day. The same thing the earlier conversation had forced out of their heart. The same thing they now understood had been missing between you. And suddenly your soulmate began to see the entire connection through another lens. Maybe the great obstacle was never a lack of feeling. Maybe it was two hearts trying to protect themselves at the same time. Maybe the tragedy was not that love disappeared. Maybe it was that fear became louder than communication. And if that was true, there was still one question that mattered more than all the others. Were they willing to do something differently now? Your soulmate closed their eyes. For several seconds, they said nothing. Then they stood. The person with them asked where they were going. Your soulmate reached for their coat, their keys, or whatever belonged to the moment, and there was something different in their posture now. Not certainty. Not reckless urgency. Something quieter. Resolve. They said, "I need to know the truth instead of guessing anymore." But they were not finished. The person asked, "And if the truth is not what you hope?" Your soulmate stopped. That question mattered. Because genuine courage does not come from believing you can control the answer. It comes from deciding that truth is worth facing even when you cannot. Your soulmate looked back and said, "Then at least they will finally know what I should have told them a long time ago." There it was. Another sentence that could not be taken back. And this one revealed that whatever happens next, your soulmate is approaching a point where silence may no longer feel possible. But my child, there is one final detail you need before this part ends. As your soulmate prepared to leave, the person who had heard everything asked them one more thing. "What exactly are you going to tell them?" Your soulmate looked down. The answer did not come quickly. Their first confession had been powerful, but it was still incomplete. Because there was something underneath the fear of losing you. Something underneath the regret. Something underneath the endless question of what could have been. They finally knew what it was. Their expression changed. They looked almost surprised by their own realization. And then they said 4 words. 4 words the other person was not expecting. 4 words that made them stop asking questions. 4 words that may explain why your soulmate has never truly been able to place you in the past. But those 4 words were not, "I still love them." They were something much more revealing. Something that connects your soulmate's silence, their fear, the old message they misunderstood, and the reason they are now standing on the edge of a decision they can no longer postpone. And just before they said those words aloud, your soulmate whispered your name. Then they took a breath. And finally, the truth they had hidden even from themselves began to come out.